Hey folks, David Stewart here. I am here with John Mollison, and we are going to talk a little bit today about genres, the genre spaces, writing in different genres, and probably whatever else we feel like talking about. So, welcome to NewPub Talk, where we like to talk about the new publishing industry, the new ways of writing, and just the new break and return to the old tradition that is also pulp rev. So thanks so much for joining me this Wednesday. Don't forget, we are here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. That's 9 p.m. Eastern. Hope you all are having a great day. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having
All
me
right.
on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. If you don't see John's beautiful face, it's because I guess he's staying at an Airbnb. Therefore, he must be incognito as far as this is concerned. So John is the author of Neon Harvest. That is the newest book. You'll find it linked over in chat, and I can link it one more time. Why don't you tell us about this particular book, because I think it crosses a couple of the spaces that we're going to talk about.
Sure. So, in a single word, it's cyberpunk, but it's there's been a revival. We're now to the point where we're seeing revival of the kind of early '90s retro future aesthetic, and so the kind of thing you see in Blade Runner. So I actually took it's essentially Red Harvest set in a neon dayglow city. I'm hoping that inspiration comes through pretty clearly. Unlike the Continental Op, I've got a protagonist who is pretty fed up with the modern world in which he finds himself. And it's essentially, if you took 1990s tech and extrapolated it 30 years forward without a whole lot of changes, he's trying to navigate that world at the same time that he's a private investigator who's trying to navigate the high stakes finance and big business deals by finding essentially what amounts to the cyberpunk equivalent of the princess in the tower. And along the way, he discovers a lot of unsavory things about what he thought was an honest business. And so I think in that way, I was able to kind of touch on a lot of the open conspiracies that we now know about in our culture today. And because the world is on the cusp of a revolution that we've been dealing with the last 25 years, it has a number of things to say about where we are now and about where we might have gone wrong and about how we might have done things different.
All right, great. So what I like about, so actually let's start and we'll talk a little bit about cyberpunk. So the idea of genre has become a more diverse thing over the last century. And I'm not going to get too deep into this, but there's actually a split, I think, that happens in the early 20th between genre fiction, which actually continues the literary traditions of the 19th century, and structuralist and modernist literature, which attempts to invent, shall we say, new ways of doing things and new approaches to literature. So genre fiction has always been of a particular interest to me because it's what I like to read, and it's what the vast majority of people like to read. But as we've gone on, just like how you get a diversity of different music genres, you've gotten a diversity of different literary genres, and cyberpunk is one of those. So cyberpunk is really, if we were to think broadly, it's science fiction. But it's science fiction with a couple of important tropes that help you identify something as cyberpunk. And so one of the things I think would be great for us to talk about a little bit is the expectations of a reader when it comes to some of these genres are really important. And so they expect a certain amount of kind of tropic relationship to other things in the cyberpunk genre. So what are some of the elements in Neon Harvest that are kind of related to that genre?
Technology drives the plot in a number of surprising ways, and even the sort of proto-internet rears its ugly heads, and the proto-social media. Cyberpunk is probably the easiest to grasp. There's a growing movement for the synth wave. I'm sure you're familiar with that kind of music. And to be honest with you, it was listening to that and looking at the aesthetics of synthwave that inspired me to write this book, because I kept looking at all this great art and thinking, man, I want to read that book. I want to read that book. Nobody was writing it. So I kind of looked around and went, oh, yeah, I write things. So I wrote the book I want to read. And it's only cyberpunk in that, we're pushing those boundaries again. We're looking for the cracks between the genres that have yet to be filled. And there's a magazine, Pulp Modern, that actually, I think it was Pulp Modern. They actually did a whole they did a whole issue on, and they called it tech noir retro future. So it's
Yeah.
it's instead of cyberpunk, it's more analog punk, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, I've seen a couple revivals like that. So if you look at, say, science fiction or futurism in, say, the 1960s, it had a very different vision of where we would be than that which was created in the late 80s and early 90s in particular. One which was kind of utopian in its forwardness in a way, and one that was explicitly dystopian. So cyberpunk always tends to have an element of dystopia to me. And one of the things that, speaking of genres crossing, you mentioned like Blade Runner. Blade Runner is really a noir story. It's a detective story, as much as it is about the setting. If we're talking about the movie, of course, the book "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" is a little bit different as well. But it has especially as a movie, it has a strong noir theme. So it's difficult to place it exactly what genre it's supposed to be in, because it uses some of these tropic elements from both spaces. And that's something that I think is really interesting that you can do in any genre, is to pull things a little bit from those other genres, pull things from noir. I feel like cyberpunk and noir tend to go pretty well together, because the cyberpunk plot style tends to be about not just technology driving people forward, but there's an uncovering of unsavory details that often happens as part of this. There's revelations. And whenever there's revelations, that makes me think of detectives, and it makes me think of noir.
And they're also very drawn towards the black and white distinctions. The visual aesthetics of the two, with dark shadows that are hiding things, and the protagonist trying to uncover those shadows, and and whether it's the old noir films that were pure black and white, or the modern trope of the neon lights of the early 90s aesthetic, they're very similar. It's, in fact, you could argue that one is an outgrowth or an evolution, or the new face of the old.
Yeah, and in a way, it's the structure and a lot of I would say the story direction or plot styles of noir, but we've changed the setting. And when you change the setting, that changes the possibilities of where the story can go. This is why when I talk about that pyramid of story, where you have the setting at the bottom, the characters, and then the characters are executing the plot, setting determines all the possibilities of the story. So with a cyberpunk setting, you have technology which expands the possibilities of where the story could go, where the plot could lead you, what kind of plots you could have. All of that gets altered significantly by the way the setting works. Of course, one of my favorites with that is Snow Crash, which I think is probably a classic in the genre. If you guys haven't read that, Snow Crash is probably a good book to start with in the genre. And again, it crosses some of those lines. There's futurism in it. There's dystopia. There's also, the uncovering of mysteries. It's really very interesting how those things can combine to create an atmosphere that's very unique.
Absolutely. And Snow Crash is one that inspired this as well. The other thing that I would touch on is that the aesthetics that you draw and the genre that you're staking your claim to, they do establish the rules, and there is a sort of agreement between the creator and the consumer that, okay, if I'm going to feed you a pure cyberpunk, then you have some expectations going in, and at a minimum the creator owes it to the reader to lay out what those rules are at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And you've touched on this in a lot of your videos, where whatever your genre is, if you're going to break one or two of the rules, you need to establish that right away and then stick to it, so that you don't just, it's not the sudden twist. You got to at least throw some hints down if you're going to have those twists. And I think Neon Harvest does that pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's an important element for anyone that's going to be writing mysteries. So noir tends to focus around mystery. And if you want to know what a mystery plot is, it's not necessarily Nancy Drew trying to find the culprit, or like the footprints under the window or something like that. It's really about approaching a protagonist trying to discover what the truth is about a situation, whatever that situation happens to be. And through the way that you present the entire situation, your readers are going to be predicting what's going to happen. They're going to be thinking, they're going to get hints about whatever you're writing in a scene, and they're going to start to think about what is actually the solution to the mystery. What is the protagonist actually trying to figure out? What is the author going to reveal to me? And being able to play with those expectations is where mysteries can be really well done. I think if somebody's interested in using mystery plot formats, I still think the biggest selling author of all time is Agatha Christie. And she wrote a whole lot of mysteries, and they're usually very well executed. And that's kind of the standard form to go to. And there's a way that you can write it. So if you have a plot format that's like that, you can plug different settings in, whether it's going to be like a dystopian cyberpunk, or in the case of Harry Potter, at least the first 3 Harry Potter books, they're mystery books, but set in this Hogwarts place. And
you
that's
can even
really
get away with that in comedies, because if you look at The Hangover, that is a mystery.
Absolutely. There was one, I forget the name of it now, but yeah, The Hangover is a mystery. You can do that in a lot of comedies. I think there was one called The Gun Seller by Hugh Laurie, who's actually an actor, but he wrote a book called The Gun Seller, and that's that. It's kind of a mystery book, but a comedy of errors with it. So you can do a lot of things with that format, where you're trying to figure out what is really there, because people are also trying to. It's kind of like a puzzle. People are trying to puzzle out what the solution is going to be as well. And I actually used the mystery book format, now I'm thinking about it, in Muramasa Blood Drinker, which is my samurai novel, and you can still get that on Amazon if you're interested in this. So this is a mystery format crossed with Sengoku period Japan, or late Ashikaga period, whatever you want to look at there. So I used a mystery plot format for that, and then I also used what I call Shakespearean plot format as far as how the events are organized, and that was unique in that setting. So it's a little bit different from most samurai novels if you feel like checking that one out.
That's also one. So the avatar that I've got right there is from my most recent book before Neon Harvest. It's called Overlook. And it's the same thing. It's a guy who is investigating a conspiracy. And so the mystery is who's at the top. And once you know who's at the top, once you realize that you're outclassed from a power perspective, how do you beat them? And sometimes that's the mystery in itself, is how do I find whatever the magic key is to unlock that weakness to take them down?
Yeah. I kind of thought and thinking of say Star Wars, that's really how how Force Awakens was actually set up at the beginning of the movie. And then they just kind of abandoned that halfway through. And that's one of the reasons that the plot was so bad. Is that if you set up a mystery style plot, you really have to see it through. Otherwise, you just leave your audience hanging. You can't
that's
just
J.J. Abrams' secret, right?
Quest. Yeah, that's it. That's what he always does, I think. I think he always sets up a mystery box like, hey, wouldn't you like to know what this really is? And just never really fulfills it.
And you can get away with that one time. He got away with it for Lost, but ever since then, every single time he does it, it's less and less likely. The more complaints you hear from people saying, okay, this would be great if I had any confidence in the creator that he had an explanation for this stuff, but I know he doesn't. So why even bother?
Yeah. I was thinking about that actually, because when he handed this off to Rian Johnson, he didn't tell him anything about anything, apparently. And so Rian Johnson just thought all of the mystery boxes were stupid and filled him in with whatever he wanted. And it ended up making a movie that really offended a lot of people. But of course, once we saw the new Star Wars movie, there really wasn't that much to put in them to begin with, to put in the mystery boxes. Pursuits of a Polymath, that's Jesse White, the artist. The God and the Bull is an anti-mystery Conan story. I'll have to look at that. Do I have my Conan book here? I don't know if I do.
An anti-mystery Conan story. I might be wrong. I want to say The God and the Bull is the first Conan story. And it's a story where Conan breaks into... He's hired to recover an artifact from a wizard. And he's hired by the wizard who thinks he owns the artifact. And he is... as he is breaking into the 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 one wizard's vault, he is interrupted by the local police, so to speak. And so what you have is a mystery where the reader knows that Conan is, how do I put this? Because I don't want to spoil it for people. I know it's an 80-year-old story, but essentially the bulk of the story is the investigation conducted by the police of Conan, and as the story unravels, as he plunges deeper into his investigation, the reader becomes aware of who Conan is, what he's doing there, and why there's a lot more going on than anybody expects. And then at the end, the big payoff is, I mean, it's essentially just one big boss fight that lasts almost one paragraph. And Robert E. Howard is such a great writer. He winds up packing easily, a full chapter's worth of action into that one paragraph. Highly recommended. But I think that's what Jesse's getting at.
Yeah, here's what he says. It undoes the trope that the sleuthing all amounts to nothing. So doing all of the work doesn't really result in anything. The power of the man is what solves the crime.
That's pretty deep, man. He ain't wrong.
Yeah, but that's Conan in a nutshell. I mean, it's why I love. Robert E. Howard was pretty irreplaceable, but it's why I love a lot of Conan stories. Is that it really is about the will of the warrior. It's Conan exacting his will upon others in ways that is really unique in each kind of story. And it's similar, his predecessor to that, Cole the Atlantean, also has things like that as well. So one of the first Cole stories is called, I think I have
By This Axe.
No, By This Axe I Rule, but ended up becoming the first Conan story. It became The Phoenix on the Sword, because whoever he was submitting it to didn't like Cole. He thought he was too brooding or something. I'm trying to remember the name of this Conan, this Cole story. But basically he's king, and he gets a revelation that, someone's going to try to kill you. And he makes an uneasy alliance with these Picts, and turns out like he's surrounded by snake people in disguise, reptiles in disguise, that are trying to kill him. And the resolution of the plot is not really uncovering something special about the snake men. It's really just that Cole is a powerful warrior able to simply destroy them when he needs to. Is that he he avoids being killed or being surprised, but at the end of the day, they attack him in swarms, and it's his warrior prowess that ends up killing off all of his enemies. And we see that a lot with Conan as well. It's really about Conan exacting his will rather than Conan. Conan is not doesn't lack cleverness or anything like that, but it's really about him doing what he wants, and that's kind of what's fun about the character. Kind of lost really heroic characters like that as time has gone on. Kind of Corner says cyberpunk stems from noir, which I think I think they're really closely related. I think the cyberpunk is the setting change of noir. Seth Smith asks if either of you seen the Green Knight trailer. If so, what did you think about it? I have not seen a trailer for a Green Knight movie or anything like that. Is it like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? Are they making that into a movie? That might be cool. But I don't, so because I don't watch movie trailers and I don't watch TV, so I don't see movie trailers incidentally. And I occasionally watch YouTube videos, but YouTube doesn't think I like movies, so it never shows me movie trailers. It only shows me ads for things like paint. I don't know. Does it show me anything like that? So I never see movie trailers, and I almost never go to the movies anyway these days. So it's always kind of a moot point unless somebody's really hyped up about the trailer and wants to know what I think about it. I'm not, I just don't go out of my way to watch them. I have no idea what's coming out. Or I guess there was, did the Academy Awards already happen? I think those already happened a while back.
They did.
Does anyone know who won? I think it was something like, I don't remember what the one that won last year was like the lady banging the fish monster.
Yeah, this one was the Korean movie about con men getting conned and kind of a class war thing called Parasite.
Okay, Parasite. All right, I've seen people talking about it. I guess I'm on Best Picture. I don't really like. I don't really follow it so much, so I just kind of tangentially know about this stuff. Nitaku Dragon Soul. So I finished my first book. Congratulations. That's a lot of work, and it's a sci-fi survival story. Again, there's kind of two different genres there. Although survival has been kind of, it's not as much of a. At one point, it was a genre like in the early 20th century, Robinson Crusoe, Tarzan kind of stuff in a way. Now, though, I have to go back and edit it due to the dialogue being atrocious. Any pointers? So my best pointer for dialogue is to say the dialogue out loud. And if you say it out loud, it will reveal any kind of cringiness or awkwardness. But at the same time, a lot of people make a mistake in thinking that their dialogue needs to sound exactly the way somebody would just speak. And it really needs to be something that's correct for books. I think Brian
You should
Niemeyer calls it the
imagine
best of. It's like
one
a
of the
best
ways
of
I do it
conversation.
is that imagine if you had the ability to go back and say what you really meant to say. So all of those late night, oh, you know what I should have told that guy? That's the way your characters should talk.
Yeah.
You know, they get a
Yeah, that's
second
great.
pass. Give it to them. Let them clean it up and take out the ums and ahs, because it is hyper real, and you need to convey a lot of information through just the dialogue that other people are conveying through a lot of nonverbal means. You know, whether it's facial expression or the simple pauses. That sort of thing needs to be conveyed just through dialogue as much as possible. You get a raised eyebrow, you get a downturned mouth, but you cannot possibly, I could spend a paragraph trying to describe David, what he's trying to communicate with his expression right now on the camera. You don't want to do that. It slows down the story. You want to get in, explain their mood, explain what they want out of the conversation. It's like everything else. Get in early and get out, or get in late and get out early.
Yeah. So if you're writing a book, you always have to approach the medium properly. And so a book lacks all the visual information, right? You can't see what somebody looks like. You can't see their expression on their face. You can't, there's also a lot of additional information that's communicated with the way we talk. So the way we talk has a bunch of extra information that we pick up on, like unless you are on the autism spectrum, in which case you're going to miss a lot of that information. But, the average person's going to pick up on that. Like saying, you could say the same thing 3 different ways and communicate 3 different things. So when you're writing a book, you have to be aware that you can't carry that amount of information. So this is why when people say show, don't tell, it's kind of not correct for books, because you really have to just convey the information directly to the reader rather than attempt to describe some visual input and spending 10 sentences to try to explain some expression on his face. That's not worth it. You just say he looked incredulous, and that gives you the information that you need to have. So you have to think about what additional information you're going to put in next to the dialogue. The advantage of the book is that you can tell the reader what they need to know. So if you're dealing especially with a mystery, it's very easy to communicate to the reader exactly what they need to know for the setting or the story. You can just spend a paragraph explaining how the doors work if you need to, because the doors are important to the story. You are going to have a hard time explaining that in a movie. And then in a movie, you have to rely on the dialogue to explain things which aren't able to be explained visually. So you have a different medium. I think one of the big mistakes people make when they're trying to write a book is they write a head movie, which is they write dialogue, imagining there's a movie there, and then they don't think about how that dialogue needs to be different for a book, and also how you actually need to use prose in a book rather than simply describing visual things. You can use that prose in a variety of different ways. You describe smells, looks, feelings, an internal feeling a character has. If you have, say, a personal perspective, or you're writing in the first person, feelings are something you can easily just express. I was bound up with fear and I couldn't move. How do you communicate that visually? You have to show somebody looking afraid and have some space occur. It's going to be a completely different approach for a visual thing like a movie. So be aware of that as well. You don't have to do everything through dialogue. You can use prose to explain things. Actually, that reminds me of something too. So Brandon Sanderson often does the opposite of my advice, which is he will spend long portions of the book having characters explain to each other how the world works, rather than just saying how the world works, like, rather than just giving the information directly to the reader, saying, this is the least expensive, this is the money. And he'll do that too. But like in some cases, the characters will spend long chapters learning magic and learning how magic works. And the characters are explaining to each other how magic works. And in a lot of cases, that's wasted space, because you don't need to do all that explanation if you can do it in a more direct fashion with just prose.
There are two tricks to getting around that, and both of them involve explanations to characters in the work. It's pretty common when you have a person from our time landing either kidnapped by aliens or, they fall through a hole into a fantasy world. Another character has to say to that character, hey, in this world, this is how it works. And you see this in movies a lot too. They use this technique all the time. The other way to do it is to make one of the characters a neophyte. So if you want to explain how a magic system works, great. You have one of your characters be a student in, say, the magic school, where the professor says, and this is how Harry Potter works. Harry Potter, it actually does a little bit of both. He is from the normal world, and he gets taken to wizarding school, where he spends half of his time being instructed as the reader is being instructed as to how the rules of magic, such as they are, actually work.
Yeah, so that's something I call that the Connecticut Yankee, which is just from Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. So this is something that you can do in a variety, actually, of genres, whether they're sci-fi or fantasy, where the setting elements are going to be profoundly different from what the reader is used to. So if you're taking them to another world, having to explain to them how the world works, you can either do it, kind of directly, like as an aside, or you can have a character who is a fish out of water, is the Connecticut Yankee, going back in time or going to a different world and having to learn about how that world works. Of course, they're going to ask the questions that the reader would ask, and then you get to have characters explain how they work. And in some cases, that can be really useful because you can communicate even more additional information, such as characters being contemptuous of somebody not knowing something, or being guarded or reserved about the knowledge of the way things work. And it lets you kind of slowly uncover things. And that tends to work, I think, pretty well. Another thing that you can do is the characters in general are going to be discovering forgotten knowledge or hidden knowledge, something that is actually not obvious to most of the characters that exist in the story either. So that gives you an opportunity for them to go and query and figure out the way that things work. I think one of the reasons Harry Potter works kind of as escapist fantasies, because Harry Potter is a normal kid when you first meet him, and therefore he goes into a magical world that's extraordinary, but everybody else there considers magic mundane, and he gets to experience something fantastical that other people don't think is fantastical and are trying to teach him as if it's like teaching math or something like that. It's just kind of blasé to the wizards of the wizarding world, and it's special to the reader. So that actually, I think, works a lot to kind of heighten that escapist feeling.
Yeah, the red flag you're going to look for is when a character says to another character, as you know, okay, they both know it. They're not going to.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, again, and like all other advice, there are times where you need to do that. They may be building a theory, and so they say, okay, here's what we both know, and then they start to extrapolate. But that's kind of the red flag. If you catch yourself writing that, stop.
Yeah, there's a bunch of dialogue at the beginning of The Phantom Menace that George Lucas clearly didn't get the right feedback on. It's Queen Amidala sitting around in her throne room with all of her advisors, and they're just saying stuff to each other that they already know. And I don't know if they say as you know, but it's really close. It's like, they couldn't do this, they can't do that. That's not the way the Senate works. That's not the way this works. It's like these people exist in this time and place. They already know these things. So a lot of that dialogue feels really awkward at the beginning of that movie, because it's really people saying a lot of things to each other that they already know. It's an attempt at indirect exposition that doesn't work, because the viewer or the reader is actually in on the fact that these people already know what they're talking about. It's like two math teachers don't sit around talking about how to do long division. You know, they just wouldn't do that. They already know that. All these years I've been mispronouncing Cole. I've always pronounced it cool because he shares the same name spelling as a friend of mine. Well, then maybe it's actually cool and I've been saying it wrong all these years. Green Knight trailer looks kind of legit, and yes, it is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. That's based on it. That's a very classic English tale. Tom Hanks has coronavirus. This is new. Parasite won. Okay. Satan won the Academy Award. I kind of felt that. Oh no, I was it. It was the gold. Was it the Golden Globes where the woman came up and said something about how she wouldn't be there if she hadn't had an abortion or something like that? And it was just like super cringe. Super chat from Raul Nyanzi. I have an announcement to make at the end of March. Some of you might have some idea what it is. Please keep quiet. Well, I'm not keeping very quiet with that super chat, my friend. So we'll find out what that announcement is.
Anticipation intensifies.
Let's see here. One thing I like about the Cole Tales is how he has Brule the Pict as a trusted companion who is of the same spirit, while Conan is more isolated. Now, it's interesting because Conan is more singular, but Cole, it seems more isolated in his mind. He's much more brooding. He's much more kind of self-reflective and introverted. And he doesn't readily trust anyone and only trusts Brule through extreme demonstrations where Brule is killing the reptiles that are pursuing him. And then finally, he trusts him as a friend because there's just no other option besides that. I guess Joaquin Phoenix won the Oscar for Best Actor, I guess, for Joker, which I still haven't seen, guys. Ray Bradbury read aloud as a final check of his story. I do that as well if I can, if I have time to do it, because I find even a sentence, if you read it aloud and it kind of trips up the tongue a bit, then maybe there's some word choice. Just a little bit of changes of word choice sometimes can make the sentence flow a lot better and just make it a much better read. And especially if you read a sentence and you're confused ever, you need to stop and rewrite that sentence.
Nick Cole does the same thing.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's a really good idea. I think one of the things I might try to do for my workflow in the future, because everyone wants audiobooks, is rather than launching the book and then worrying about the audiobook later, I'll do the audiobook, and that's kind of a way that you can catch little things like that. So you're saying it out loud as you do the audiobook. So as you do the audiobook for it, you're like, well, that kind of sounds awkward out loud, and you could stop and maybe do an edit real quick, find typos and things like that before the manuscript goes out. I might do that. My experience with writing is if I really know my characters, how they talk kind of emerges by itself. And I'd say how they talk. I really think about that before they ever talk. I have a good idea of who the characters really are. Let's see here. What else we got? Yeah, this one. You said once you don't make many movie reviews because people aren't interested in reviews made months late. I can't speak for everyone, but I'd be interested in seeing late reviews. I can do them, but and you may be interested in them, and they may be useful for people as far as story analysis goes, and that's fine. And I'll do that if I watch a movie. But when it comes down to the numbers, if you're looking at the numbers, if you are not shipping a review before it comes out, or the day it comes out, you are mostly going to be spinning your wheels. You're mostly wasting your time. The difference can be really dramatic. So if I do a review of a Marvel movie the day it comes out, I'll get thousands and thousands of views. If I do that same Marvel movie 3 months later, when it comes out on video or it's on Netflix, it's like hundreds of views. People just don't care. They really don't care unless it's like on their mind. They're going to think it's an older video anyway because it's not timely. There's a lot of problems with doing movie reviews, and frankly, it's the same problem doing video game reviews because I don't have enough time to really play through a lot of games, and I certainly don't have time to play a game the weekend it comes out and beat it and then do a review of it. There's no way I can handle that amount of time. I have way too much stuff going on. So for people that can do that, more power to you. But there's no feasible way for me to even get out once a week to go see a movie and just like leave my family at home for those couple of hours. We just have too much stuff going on. It's too busy. And it's nothing against anybody that wants that. It's just, I can't really emphasize that kind of thing. Okay. One thing I like about the Coal Tales is how he has Brule. Oh yeah, I just had that one. What's another one here? It was flawed, but still underrated. I don't know what we're talking about here. Oh, here we go. Best sci-fi survival in my memory was Enemy Mine with
Lou Gossett Jr. and who was the guy that crash landed?
So now I like sci-fi survival. So sci-fi survival, yes, okay. I think I remember this. This is from the 80s. Yes. So this was actually one of the themes of lots of different Star Trek episodes was survival, where you crash land on a planet and suddenly you don't have access to, all of the amazing technology that makes all the things they do in Star Trek possible. And so you have to figure out how to survive using elements of that technology, but obviously not everything. I have an episode of Star Trek where they have to break down their communicator badge and turn it into something else to repel a monster. They have to figure out how the silicon, that famous one with the silicon rock monsters attacking the mining colony in the original series is an element of that. It's a monster. It's like a little mini monster movie, but there's strong sci-fi elements in that. This life form is different from us. Is it really a monster? Does it really hate us? Is there something else we can learn? And then it seems almost silly if you watch it now, this part where Spock mind melds with this rock monster and he's like, I feel pain and stuff like that. It's kind of silly when you watch it now, but it was a really good part of the story when they wrote it. And it really made a lot of sense. And that's a story that you couldn't easily tell without the elements that are in it and have that same kind of effect.
So bear in mind also that Enemy Mine was made 30 years ago. And the message of that movie is where the two enemy combatants rely on each other to survive in a hostile world. And so it's message fiction in the sense that its diversity is our strength kind of film. And it's really well done, and it's not heavy-handed, and not to get too political, but it's the kind of movie that a lot of people don't think was ever made, and they try to make it today, and it just comes off flat because it lacks a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. It takes the time to establish the characters, to establish the stakes, and there's an arc of growth where they come together and learn to trust each other, and then there's a second act pivot where they've learned their lesson, and then they have to go off and actually apply it and convince their respective people that, hey, we need to stop fighting these guys because it's a hostile universe.
Yeah, and I think the reason a lot of this modern stuff falls kind of flat when they're trying to do it is they're approaching it entirely from the point of view of the message. So the message is not something that can be part of a legitimately good story. Rather, the message is something they want to have, and they kind of try to make a story around it in a lot of cases. That's when it feels heavy-handed, is when you can tell the message is something that they're trying to do front and center. And it also, I notice this sometimes with some sci-fi movies they do, where they're trying to be really heavy-handed with the message. The scenario they set up doesn't seem realistic, and the characters don't seem realistic. They're caricatures of people rather than fully fleshed out individuals with their own feelings about things. And that's something that you have to have if you want to have any story like that work, is the characters have to actually be themselves. They have to be human in a sense. And I know in Enemy Mine, one of the characters I think is an alien, but you have to have them be fully three-dimensional. I mean, they have a sense of morality. People have a sense of morality or purpose. They have things that there's lines they don't want to cross. They have traditions and all sorts of things that go with them. If you make somebody, I'm thinking of like the movie Avatar, they had this character played by Giovanni Ribisi, who's just like the evil businessman, and he's like playing putt-putt golf, and talking about how the stockholder, like everything is about the stockholders. And you watch it and you're like, this is what James Cameron really imagines businessmen are like. That they're just not human beings, and they care nothing for anything else on planet Earth. And there might be some like that, but that's not the way human beings operate. If he was really human, he'd be like, I'm really concerned about them. You need to find another way around this, because the reality is we paid a lot of money to come here, and we're all going to get fired if we don't come out of here with this mineral, rather than just playing it off like, oh, the stockholders, that's what businessmen care about. The stockholders, my profits. And the evil army guy was like super mustache twirling evil man as well. It's just like ridiculous. And it's kind of funny because they made him the evil guy, and I think he was the only character I really liked. I wanted him to win. What do you think of fiction written as nonfiction, like World War Z? So have you ever read or listened to World War Z?
I have not.
Okay. So there's an audiobook version that is actually one of the most unique audiobooks I've heard. Basically, it's constructed like a series of interviews. World War Z, the movie, is not at all like the Max Brooks book. So if you read if you listen to the audiobook, they got a bunch of different actors to play the part of the interviews. And so it's really a unique audiobook experience. I think I have it on CD. My sister bought it for me years and years ago. Very, very fun, very, very fun listen. And a very unique and interesting way of constructing a story. And this is an indirect way of storytelling. And the way that you do this in an indirect fashion is, it's completely indirect. You are pretending that you're doing a documentary and interviewing people about their experiences, rather than just telling a story with a plot and that sort of thing. I think if you do it that way, you have to be aware that it's been done before. And in fact, people have done this with fiction, with like letter writing as a way of indirectly describing a story. This goes all the way back to the 19th century. Portions of Dracula are like this. There's a lot of this kind of indirect storytelling. You have to be able to make the characters really convincing, interesting in and of themselves in the way they speak, and to always be hinting and revealing the next piece of information if you're going to go that way. So I do enjoy that. It's not something that I necessarily seek out, because I tend to prefer a little bit more straight shooting on the story. I don't know how you feel about it, John.
It's essentially the found footage version of narrative crafting. It's just the prose version of found footage. And if done right, it can lend immediacy to, and it can help with the suspension of disbelief. Nick Cole also has a novel that's written the same way, where I think they're actually using literally found footage in one case, and it's 3 researchers looking back from like 100 years after the zombie apocalypse and piecing together. It's a romance story, but it's pieced together in a very unusual way. And so, like everything else, it's a tool, and if you use it right, it can produce some wonderful things. But if you use it wrong, it's just not going to work.
Okay. Another one from Fantasy Fan. My approach thus far is to have my characters perform some feat, then emphasize the limits of the act, so the readers get a feel for the proverbial ceiling. So this is a really good way of indirectly exposing the setting. And the example that I use that does this really well is actually it's actually a Brandon Sanderson book. It's The Way of Kings. So he does this in a couple ways in The Way of Kings. The first couple bits are really teasers. They don't reveal anything that's important for the story. They just make you wonder about the universe. Like, what the hell's going on here? But one of the first big scenes that you have is this assassin going through this castle and using all this magic. And as he uses the magic, there's an explanation for how that magic works. And this is really important because we see all this magic happening, and it just shows you everything, all the set pieces that exist for that entire book. So later in the book, when a character learns to do this magic on his own, it doesn't come out of nowhere. We get a sense that this is already something that's baked into the world. It's not that surprising, but we're excited that somebody else gets to do it. We're excited to see the character grow towards this extreme power that we saw at the beginning of the book. It's actually a really good way to begin a book, begin it with action, first of all, but also you're showing the reader exactly what's going to be in the story, where all the limits are, who's there, what people can do. All that kind of stuff is really good for a sci-fi or a fantasy book. You could do it in sci-fi too. You begin with the action and show some of the technology that's important. You once said you don't make many movie reviews because people aren't interested in reviews made months late. Oh, before I go on, John, did you have anything else to add to that?
Nah, you're doing great, kid. Keep it up.
Okay. You once said you don't make, okay. Let me see. There's somebody had a follow-up to that. Do in-depth movie analysis like your video on the biblical symbolism of Alita and tend to get more views than typical reviews, assuming both are months after the movie's release. Yes, they do. So if you're talking about something that's real specific, and of course that kind of cues into a question. Like when someone sees that, they're like, there's biblical symbolism in Alita, and it's like, let me explain what is there, what I see. And so if people haven't seen that, or they maybe got that and they kind of want to see somebody explain it more, it'll get more views than just a straight up review. That's true. So that's the follow-up to that question. George Lucas isn't the best dialogue
Before
writer.
we move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
If you are, this is the right stream after all, if you are a practicing writer, then I do recommend going back and watching movie reviewers who specifically write from a story crafting perspective. There are a wealth of people that will dissect movies and tell you what works and what doesn't work, from everything from plot to theme to characters, how all of that stuff relates. And if it's a movie you've seen, then in a lot of cases, it may even change your opinion of the movie as you see, okay, this is how, and a lot of it is, this is how the movie makers manipulated the audience, which is gold for writers, because now that's a weapon you can add to your arsenal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the purpose of analysis, and this is something I'll talk about in my book that's coming out this month, Keys to Prolific Creativity. Is you must make time to consume content. You need to consume content partially because you enjoy it, and it's something that's fun. You can't have a life that's, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. You have to have a little bit of fun in your life, but it contains the tools that you will use as a writer, as a creative person, to create your own art. So by analyzing what other people have done, you get kind of tools to add to your toolbox. And when you want to have something that has a similar effect, you can see how somebody else did it, and you can create something similar. Not necessarily a copy of that, but a way of executing your story in a way that has a similar effect to what was there. So it's really good to spend time analyzing movies, and hearing what other people have to say as far as analysis is also good, because they point at things that maybe, you didn't see the first go around, or you weren't completely aware of. So it's always good to be consuming art and to be thinking about how the art works. It will make you a better writer. And I think this was from Stephen King's On Writing book. If you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write, because you won't have the tools to write either, reflections are more popular now. Like, this movie made me think of this other concept and connect the dots. It's interesting. There is an art in picking what films to cover. They still have to be popular if you want views, even if other films have more meat. And there's also something that you kind of have to play the game with in terms of social media. And I really should talk more about this for anybody that's interested in doing a YouTube channel or anything like that. There are topics that you can pick which will get you more views. And those are usually going to be controversial or like, hot take kind of stuff, where here's my hot take: this movie sucks. Well, you're going to attract a lot of people that think that movie sucks. What you do afterwards, though, is important, because what you want to do is you want to convert those looky-loos, the people who are attracted to that exciting, click-worthy content. You want to convert them into subscribers who will watch your more in-depth content and feel good about something else that you have to say. This is important. If you attract people with negative talk, which is, I'm just going to level with you guys, being negative gets a lot more attention than being positive. It just does. So yes, you should use negativity if you have a strong feeling about something, be negative. But then you need to take that person who had that negative feeling or was attached to you because of a negative resonance and create something that has a positive, good feeling resonance with them. Talk about something else that they like. So if, let's say I have a movie review that Star Wars sucks, or this, Force Awakens sucks. You follow that up with a review that's like, Empire Strikes Back is really good, and here's why, and here's the things that work in it. And so a lot of those people will follow up and read that, and they'll feel good about what you had to say about it because they feel good about that movie too. Or, you deliver them a story, you give them a story that they like, that resonates with them and makes them feel good. So there's always going to be this play between negative and positive, and you have to be aware of it. And I think some of the most popular guys who manage their social media or their platforms, whether it's, someone like, I don't know, Vox Day as an example, who really runs a very popular blog. He has a lot of negativity that resonates with people. At the same time, he also can push that negativity out to people buying books and feeling good about reading one of his books. So you got to be aware of how those things are going to play out. I agree, Raul. In-depth analysis probably works better. My video on the Lighthouse has over 87,000 views, which surprised me. That's great. And you want to have those views. The more views you have total on your channel, the more YouTube is going to promote your videos as well. And if you have less total views, it's gonna not promote your videos as much. But you definitely want to see how many subscribers you can get from a video like that, and then follow up with something else that makes them feel really good about something, or something else that really makes them more attached to whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to do.
Hey, is there a bit of a balancing act that you play where you're seeing better returns when you're reviewing a movie like The Lighthouse, which has a lot less direct analysis than something like Star Wars, that you can corner the market on that movie much better than just being yet another negative Star Wars review? What's your experience been on that?
So my experience is, first of all, I'm like the original Star Wars hater. So I was doing negative Star Wars reviews basically before other people were. So I've seen kind of both sides of it. And it was only like with Last Jedi where everyone was like, the people who were, the same people who were sending me hate mail and like death threats because I didn't like Force Awakens were now saying I was totally right about The Last Jedi. It was kind of an interesting experience, but so for me, I think it'd be really hard to pick that stuff out ahead of time. It's really hard to know what's going to go viral or like what's going to explode ahead of time. Because if you did, then you would just do that every time. But in general, you have to think about how big the market is, that because there's going to be an upper limit to some of that stuff. The upper limit to negative Star Wars reviews is the number of people on YouTube who care about Star Wars. There's an upper limit to that. Not everyone. In fact, most people on YouTube don't care about Star Wars or Star Wars reviews or anybody crapping on Star Wars at all. So you're always going to be looking at where the upper limit is. And so 87,000 views, which is actually really good. That's a lot of views for like a movie, a movie analysis video. That means that there was some large potential audience that really cared about how an analysis of The Lighthouse was going to be. And now Lighthouse is probably a good film to choose because it's a film that people already have an association with it, that there's something deeper going on with it. So if you were going to do analysis of a similar movie, if you're going to do an in-depth analysis, if you pick a movie that people already know has some sort of depth to it or some sort of importance to it, that's good. The other route to go is to just pick something really popular and try to have an original take on it. So I know that doesn't totally answer your question, John, but that's the best kind of answer that I can give. You're not going to do necessarily better by cornering the market, but it's something that you can do, and really something that you should do as well. You shouldn't stick to one thing, because then you're limiting you have an upper limit on your reach. So if you only do Star Wars, you're only going to be talking to the same Star Wars people. And I see a lot of the Star Wars channels from 2 years ago, just really like occasionally they come out with like a social media post on Twitter about how their views have collapsed and how bad they feel about like that they can't do YouTube for money anymore or something like that. And it's like, well, the fans get bored of having the same discussion every week or every day. Fans are going to get bored of you saying the same thing over and over again. At first, they like to hear you say what's on their mind as far as how upset they are about a Star Wars movie, but that's going to wane over time. And if you don't have anything else going on, then it's just, it's bound to happen. You're bound to have your views collapse. Let's see here. I like this. Good dialogue will give the audience information without actually saying it. Would you guys agree with this, John?
Without actually, I'd have to think about that one.
So I think
because you can convey a person's state of mind simply through the words. Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, good dialogue will include that information, and it's a little harder to do with the book when you don't have an actor emoting upon words, but you definitely can do it. And that is something that makes the character convey extra information, but also makes them more real, because we're used to a lot of subtextual information coming through speech with other human beings. It's a normal part.
You get that too. There's the classic saying that acting is reacting, and how a person, as a conversation is flowing between two characters in the book, you as the creator need to be aware that information flow is not just between those characters, but also between the person reading the book. And so if how many cliffhangers have ended with a big news, I slept with your sister, honey, I'm pregnant. And then you're left waiting for the next episode. How are they going to react? And just how they react is going to reveal a lot about their character, far better than simply a narrator saying, this is what the character is like. So yeah, it's a good insight.
Yeah. So two opinions on The Lighthouse. Jared says it's a really good film, and analysis makes a lot of sense. The film leaves you figuring out what you just saw in different interpretations, and it's ambiguous. There's an ambiguity to it. This actually is something that I think is very interesting about storytelling, is that if you have something ambiguous, I'm not always a fan of ambiguity, but if you do it correctly, it can be very effective, where the reader is doing a lot of thinking about what the movie means. And I talk about another pyramid, which is reacting, which is like, a monster jumps out and you react. That's the first level of feeling in a story. The next level is feeling, which is caring about the outcomes of the characters, caring about how they feel or what they do and how well they do. And the highest level is thinking, and that's going to be thinking about what things mean and, the deeper meaning, the deeper things that are going on in a story. And so a little bit of ambiguity can provoke that higher level of thought. It's kind of like the last scene of 1984, where he says he looks with tears at Big Brother, and he says he loves Big Brother. And we don't really know what that means. It's kind of left up to us to know. We get an idea that it's probably not literal on some level. Like, he doesn't literally love Big Brother, because he knows it's all false, but it's some sort of, it's an ambiguous ending. It's something that really it's left up to you, the reader, to really figure out what that means for the characters in 1984. Can you say in a work of fiction that it is a true story to create further immersion? I don't know if this is a legal thing. John, do you know?
People do it all the time. Fargo, as while we're talking about films, Fargo did that. At the very beginning, there was a scroll that said, "This is, this stuff really happened," and it didn't. It was all completely fictionalized. The other cheat there is to say this is based on a real story or inspired by true events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not. I think it would be. So this is. I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't legal advice. And even if I was a lawyer, this isn't legal advice. But if they're all fictional, if all the characters inside of it are fictional, truly fictional, then you could say it's a real story and it doesn't matter because there's nobody real in it. However, if you were telling a fictional story that involved real people and said that it was real, then you might actually have a problem. But yeah, I think if you're just telling a fictional story, it probably doesn't matter if it's actually fiction. Now, one of the things that I've thought about doing is, a fake autobiography, an autobiography of a fictional person that really pretends to be very serious about itself. And that's just another way to create immersion, like you said.
One of the ways that you can work around that is to craft a memoir. And I know that I'm going to draw a blank now. Well, at any rate, there are a number of people that have written memoirs, because essentially what you're doing is you're stating up front, this is how I remember it. And you're establishing that you're not the most reliable narrator. And somebody, it might have been Mark Twain, who said something to the effect of, this story is, or maybe it was Louis L'Amour, this story is true enough for our purposes. Something along
true
those
enough
lines.
for our purposes.
It gives you that wiggle room.
Yeah. I've purposely avoided.
That's while we're talking about Louis L'Amour, he in most of his books, he adamantly insisted that all of his locations were ground that he had walked, that he had done the research, and he had, that if he said there was a draw there that you couldn't see, there was a draw there that you couldn't see from town. And he was called out by somebody who said, you said that when you go in this dry creek, you'll see 3, Indian skeletons. And of course, he was writing in like the 40s or 50s. But when I went there, I didn't see him. And Louis L'Amour like winked and said, well, it might have only been one. So even he who said, this terrain is real, to add verisimilitude to his stories, if you caught him off guard, he would hedge his bets a little bit.
Yeah. I purposely avoided continuing my most popular series. I never wanted to force myself to make something I'm not passionate about. People can smell it when you're not inspired. This made me think of George R.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss, who have all but abandoned their popular series. Do you have any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I do. And actually, that's a great comment, because it draws us right back to the title of this video. And you've talked about this a little bit before, but you and I are two authors that refuse to be pigeonholed into a single genre. You've written science fiction, you've written straight horror, you've written fantasy, you've written samurai, and there's a lot of author advice out there today that says, no, you want to pick a genre and you want to dominate that because you want to write to the algorithm. And I think you and I both agree, I'm not writing for the algorithm, I'm writing for the readers. And if it's a project that I can be excited, if I can't get excited about it, I can't expect the reader to get excited about it. And if I'm excited, I'm going to stay highly motivated. That's your segue. That's your plug.
I absolutely agree. Now, for me, I'll continue any series when I feel good about the story continuing, and I feel like it's going to be a good story. I could hack up or I could phone in a story, I guess. And if I were George R.R. Martin, that's what I would do, because it's a paycheck and you gotta tie a bow on it and be done with it. Or Patrick Rothfuss. Patrick might just be lazy, though. I'm not sure.
Would you say that being excited is a key to productivity?
It is. So I actually have a section in the book on this, which is that inspiration is not overrated. I used to say that inspiration is overrated because it's all about hard work and doing the process. But really, the inspiration is not overrated because that's what motivates you to work. It's about having that passion, that being excited for your project, and being motivated to do it is really important. And for anybody that hasn't written a book yet or is looking to write a book, don't listen to the author advice that's like, go through your publisher rocket and find some tiny category and dominate that category and get a number one, right to the market. Don't do that, especially when you're starting out, because you haven't developed the discipline to overwork. I mean, to work above your lack of desire to be in that genre. You should work on the project that you are excited about working on, because that's what you're going to actually finish. You're not going to finish a project that you're kind of lukewarm on. You're going to finish the project that you're excited to finish. And I've learned that many times over, but it's a really important thing, I think. So for me, I tend to stick with what I'm really passionate on. So whatever project is in front of me that I'm really passionate about it. That's why I was going to publish the next Moonsong book, because it's already written. It just needs to be edited. Pretty significant edits because it's one of my earlier books. And so I wasn't as good as I am now as far as getting it done in the first couple drafts. I really need to do some more revision, but that's my heart was in finishing this little book on productivity. I just really wanted to do it and really wanted to jump out of my comfort zone and do nonfiction. So I did it. And so that was what I was excited about.
I'll add a couple of thoughts to that. If you're writing to an algorithm that changes literally every year, that's a bit short-sighted. You may do great in the short term, but if you are a writer and you need to write, then you are in this for the long term. And you need to think about the long tail as well. And you need to think about your brand. And maybe your brand is really good science fiction. Maybe your brand is epic fantasy. If that's what you're interested in, that's what you should write. And the readers will follow you regardless of what the algorithm is. And you need to look at the long tail, and you need to just keep, every single book you release, pick up a few more readers, And, by the time a few years have passed, the money will be motivational for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's actually really, really good advice. You want to think about, especially if you're looking deep into the future and you're just going to do this, you want it to be always fun. And so that means picking your projects around, what is going to be the most fun for you to do, because that's what's going to keep you going. That's what's going to keep you going. Just kind of like, it's like something like, I don't know, people do CrossFit at the gym, right? And CrossFit, there's a lot of fitness guys that make fun of CrossFit, but it gets people excited to get down to the gym and lift weights and get some exercise. And that's really underrated. It's really important to have an excitement and a passion for getting to do that project. For me, I look at it as, I want readers who like me as a writer, not just epic fantasy. So yeah, there's going to be readers that are like, I'm not really interested in the sci-fi horror stuff. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to read it. But I have many more readers that were like, I liked your fantasy stuff, but when I saw you were doing sci-fi horror, I was just really interested, because I just really wanted to hear this story. I really wanted to see this different thing from you. So I like having readers that are really interested in me as an artist, not so much me as a genre writer, right? I write in genres. So I do write genre fiction, but I don't write in one genre. And then, yeah, the current advice is like, pick a genre, stick to it. That to me is too boring. I can't do it. I'm an eclectic musician. I'm an eclectic writer too. Sometimes I can't even stick to one genre in a book. I have to mix up the genres in the book. So it's sci-fi horror, it's samurai mystery, it's something else that's mixing things up.
Fantasy Western.
You could totally do that. I think Shotgun Arcana, was that the one? I never read it.
Well, isn't that the Moonsong book 1?
Yeah, Moonsong book 1 is, I call it 310 to Yuma, but fantasy. It's not really Western. It's really like gunpowder fantasy. It's like Flintlock stuff, or like Flintlock fantasy. It's a little bit earlier than, I guess, Western stuff. But it's story that's very similar to, 310 to Yuma. So I like to mix that up too. Yeah, and it has a Western plot. Actually, yeah. So it is like a Western. You're
Meh.
right. Raul Nyanzi, the plan I think I plan to announce will make it psychologically easier for me to continue shining tomorrow. Things which make it psychologically easier for you to do things, I generally approve of. I think one of the biggest obstacles for everyone is up here. Your mindset is really important. This is something I talk about a lot in the book, and I have an exploration of a bunch of different mindsets that are important to think about when you're working, and how to be productive and creative and to enjoy what you're doing, so that over the long term there's lots of output. Going back to that long-term idea, if you just write every day, if you write 1,000 words a day, you've written 3 full-length books a year as far as drafting goes. That's a lot of output. Most people never write 1 book in their life, but if you can just stick to that writing schedule, all of a sudden you'll find after a couple of years you've written way more than you ever thought was possible for you to write. So little things really add up. Anything to add to that, John?
Nope, I'm the same way. My target is around 750 every single day, and the length, you and I write similar length novels. They're closer to the 150 to 200 pages. But I'm a firm believer in get in, tell your story, and get out. And 200 pages, we're all very busy. There's a lot of demands on our time. So a book you can read in 3 to 4 hours I would rather read a good 200-page book than a great 600-page book, because I'm a dilettante. I read the same way that I write. I want to read fantasy, and I want to read science fiction, and there are too many great authors out there, both in the indie scene and in the classics and the pulps, that I don't want to spend 8 hours reading a book when I can read 2 books in the same amount of time.
Especially if they're good. Yeah. And that was one of my goals with the shorter books, was to really cut the fat. So I made sure every scene was moving that plot forward, and people really like it. They like being able to read a book in a night and enjoy the experience and be done with it and read something else. Now, Kind of Corner says, writing for me is getting into the right headspace. And I want to address this too, because having a routine for getting into and getting out of your workspace is often really helpful. So before I write, I exercise. I either go run like a 5K or go to the gym, come home. I do this always late at night, write my words. And then after that, I read or I play a game to get me out of that work mindset where my mind is working really hard, and get into something more restful so I can get ready to go to bed. So I have kind of a preparatory routine and a routine that gets me out of it. And the more you repeat that routine, the quicker you get into that headspace. So if you have the same thing you always do, I come back from the gym, drink a protein shake, get my water, sit down, load up my document. I read what I wrote the previous day, start writing. All of a sudden, your word count starts to go up in the same amount of time. It's like 500 words, 1,000 words, 1,500 words. You start getting more done in a less amount of time, because you're getting more quickly into that functional area where your mind is working, where your brain is working, and just kind of firing things off quickly. It becomes a lot easier. So routine surrounding your routine is important as well. I also want to address this. The algorithm thing isn't really possible to do anymore. I've always found it iffy. I agree with this. I don't know if John, do you agree?
Absolutely.
I'm seeing a lot of signals that the algorithm is just not working for most people anymore. But here's the other thing about it. If you write to the algorithm, you are writing for a robot. You're writing for the approval of a robot, not a reader. And that robot is going to be reprogrammed at some point. And so when that robot is reprogrammed, all of your work directing your book towards what the algorithm is, funneling books towards certain readers, all that's going to be for naught. And your book is going to disappear from its active place in whatever algorithm you are interacting with. So you're really putting your eggs in a basket that is going to be dropped at some point. So I just prefer to write the books that I want to write and try to attract a base of readers who are interested in lots of different genres. I read lots of different genres. I like to write different genres too.
I'll say this. A lot of readers are risk averse. And once they find a universe that they're comfortable in, They would much rather stay in that universe over and over and over and over again. And it goes back all the way to the original pulps with the Shadow, with the Man of Bronze. People like that character, and they just keep going back to that same well. So if you do have a long running series like that, I think you can do well. And I think the algorithm, that's such a truism that even the algorithm recognizes that. And it's a valid strategy. If you have the kind of attention span that you can maintain that kind of output, or you can read that kind of output. But where I am right now with a hectic lifestyle, with kids in the house and multiple income streams that I'm working on, it's not possible for me either on the reading or on the writing side. If you can make it work for you, go for it. But you should be writing for the readers, not for the algorithm. And I don't think you can even keep up with the algorithm, because
Yeah,
as you said, if you're writing 1,000 words a day, then you're getting 3 books out a year. Well, by the time you get done with your trilogy, the algorithm will have moved on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gone. It's gone over to something else that's being emphasized. So it's really hard to keep up with you. The way that you can exist on Amazon with like that 20 books to 50K mentality is to, to come out with rapid release books, all in a series, all in one genre, all directed very heavily towards the keywords of that genre. That's something you can do. And there's nothing wrong with doing that if you're able to do that. But for me, I've just kind of going back to this passion thing. I got to do what matters to me. Otherwise, I'd rather drive a truck. I don't want to write stories that aren't special and interesting to me. Because otherwise, what am I? I'm doing it for money. There's lots of things I can do for money. $50,000 a year, I could go get a part-time teaching job and probably make that at this point. So there's a lot of things you can do to make money, but the point of me writing a book is that it's something important to me, not just something to get money or get attention from. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Film Girl says, my college and university teachers constantly told me that it was a bad idea to write a book / do a film in different genres, as I would apparently not appeal to or gather a good audience. And I don't agree with them. I want to try different things. I think so. Trying different things. This is another little social media strategy that you can have. You can't really predict what's going to explode or be viral. So you just kind of got to try out a bunch of different things and see what people like. If you try to go real hard in a genre and then it's not popular, what do you do? What do you do after investing all that work if for whatever reason it just doesn't hit the right notes? I'd rather write 10 weird books and then have one of them explode, and then I know which one to follow up on, rather than here's my trilogy. Like, the other strategies, like I'm going to write a trilogy and then I'm going to put it out like book 1 this week, book 2 this week, book 3 this week. That's been like the Kindle strategy for a while now. Well, what if your trilogy doesn't hit it? What if it doesn't hit the mark and people don't care about it? That's going to feel bad. Especially
don't throw good money after bad.
Yeah.
It's every single book that you release is a learning experience. I look at each one as 2 different things. One, it's a lottery ticket. Maybe there's 1 million books released a year. Maybe yours is the one that sells 1 million copies. And 2, if it flops, okay, great. You got the failure out of the way. You're that much closer to succeeding.
Yeah.
Learn from it, move on.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not, and this is another thing too. Somebody asked, I've read all these writing manuals. How do I get to your level? I'm like, you just got to do it. You just got to practice and do it. Write some stories, put them out there, see what works, what doesn't. You just have to do the work and you will get so much better. You will learn so much more about writing books or writing stories by doing it than you will by reading any writing manual. And I really sincerely mean that. It doesn't mean that there's no useful information in writing manuals or something like that. I'm just saying the practice can't be replaced with manuals. You got to do it. You got to practice. Kind of clues into what Spencer said. Although back to plugging away at that first novel. If anything, I have a problem with trying to mash too many genres together in one story. It makes it harder for me to focus on the individual elements. What do you think about that, John?
Depends on the story.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and it depends on the number of tropes you have to insert. Because every genre comes with some tropes. Like science fiction will have technology with it. Space opera has spaceships, obviously. So if you have, okay, we're going to have spaceships and we're going to have magic. That's kind of like Star Wars, right? That's two tropes you kind of mash up.
And sometimes they can be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Right? A romance should have a happy ending, and a noir shouldn't.
Good point.
How are you going to have a romance noir?
You can't. Well, I mean, it's going to feel like a really bad romance. It's going to leave everybody feeling bad at the end, which is not what you want. You want people to feel good or to feel moved. It's better to have them feel moved than impressed or anything like that. So yeah, and you start trying to juggle all these, like, oh, I want to have fantasy elements, so we'll have orcs and elves in space, like Warhammer 40K, but we'll also have hard sci-fi space travel elements, and then we're also going to have a romance in it, and there's going to be a mystery. Just like after a while, there's nothing for the reader to attach to. The readers get used to those tropes, and that they like the tropes with some variation. So if it's high fantasy, some high fantasy tropes, got some dudes with some swords, and then some new stuff you haven't seen. That's the other thing people forget about genre fiction. A lot of beginners make two mistakes. Either they try to avoid all tropes and write outside any genre, or they write so heavily towards the genre, it just has no flavor to it. It's like a Big Mac. It's like a fantasy Big Mac instead of something unique. You got to have something that you think is cool to bring to the table that's a little bit different. Otherwise, readers aren't really going to remember your story at all or care to finish it.
The other thing you can do is just accept that it might not be commercially viable. It may be that you're going to prepare a cult hit. I personally love the movie Krull. It didn't do well in the theaters.
Oh, Krull? K-R-U-L-L? Yes.
Yeah.
This was such a weird movie. I haven't seen it in a while, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a science fiction fantasy with Lovecraft. There you go. It blends a lot of different things, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. But I am certainly the only person in my household that enjoys it, despite my best efforts. And a lot of people love it. But again, if you're looking for commercial success, there's a limit to how far you can push those envelopes.
Yeah, I think so too. Edgar Allan Poe, believed a story that could be read in one sitting was the most effective because its impression on the reader would last. I think I'm not going to agree totally with Poe, because I think if a reader is reading a book for a while, they really get attached to characters. So whether it's part of a series or part of a longer book, I think if a reader spends more time with those characters, they get really attached to them, and that has a big impression as well. What do you think, John?
Absolutely.
So that reminds me, I actually wanted to do a little audiobook of an Edgar Allan Poe thing. Maybe I'll do that this week. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but it should be obvious based on where we are right now in our current news cycle. Let's see here. All right. We're starting to run out of time, folks, because it's now after 7. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, John? I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have your book listed here for anyone that is interested in checking out John's book.
Well, there's one other thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention. My superhero entry into the genre-thon is called Overlook, and I published that with Silver Empire Publishing House. And they actually, if you are a fan of multiple genres and you are a big-time reader, they are launching a competitor to Amazon's Kindle Unlimited. And you going to throw a link in there for me?
Yeah. So it's right there. It's the silverempire.org. And why don't you talk about this book club thing? It's a really good idea.
Yeah, it works a lot like, if you're familiar with Audible, it's a subscription service where they give you a set number of tokens depending on how much you're paying, and then you can redeem those tokens for a novel. And so, every month you can download, or depending on your level, you can, purchase a book, and you get it every single month. So it's there, and it's at a savings over the cost of buying each of these titles individually.
Yeah.
So if you are a frequent reader, I encourage you to check it out.
Anyway, yeah. So here's another thing that I've been talking about is I believe that there will be a contraction in the ebook market in total. So anybody that's looking to get into writing books, this shouldn't discourage you from doing it at all. It should just mean that you shouldn't depend on that algorithm, because I think the contraction is going to happen as a result of the way Amazon deals with general traffic, not because readers are going to just abandon authors that they like. But what I like about this book club is that this is a filtering mechanism. Filtering mechanisms are really important because they narrow down your choices. And if you have a good filter, or a good kind of, not gatekeeping, what's the word I'm looking for here? Curation. So if you have good curation, that means that as a reader, you know that something from Silver Empire is going to suit your taste. If you've read a book that's been published by Silver Empire, you have an idea of what kind of authors it publishes. You'll read a new author from them and have a similarly good experience. It's a way to ensure that the books that you're buying are going to be of a high quality. And I think that's going to be really important going forward, is having more publishers doing things like this. Because it's really a way to get an end run around what the algorithm is a kind of filter and a kind of curation as well. It's just not one that I think is very reliable right now, with all the ads that are on Amazon and all of the way people game the system as far as categories go, as far as genres go, to where you can't like look up a superhero fiction book without it being full of young adult fantasy or romance. You know, you can't look up lit RPG without it being crammed full of romance. Basically every genre is like crammed full of romance.
There's not a genre on that platform
Yeah.
that doesn't have dozens of headless guys with abs on the cover.
You always have to cut. There's like when you design the cover, it's always this,
Yeah.
no shirt. You always cut the top of their head off. There's actually reasons for that for anyone that's interested in cover design, but you obscure faces and show bodies because bodies are what's sexually attractive. But faces are very personal. And so you want the reader to imagine, just have enough of a hint of a face that they think that man there is handsome, and they'll imagine whatever the most handsome man is to them, of course, equipped with fully shredded abs, right?
So that is essentially the masculine version of the fan dance.
Yes. Yeah, that's
because what you leave up to the imagination will be far more powerful than just showing it. Interesting.
Now, this is an interesting thing, too, is that it's kind of, women are very attracted to the face. So why would you cut the face off? It's because the face is a little bit more powerful, and you just make their eyes be directed towards the focus of a different part of more visceral sexual attraction. So they just kind of imagine a really handsome face. Whereas if you're going to do it for men, what you might show is a beautiful woman, and you see her back and maybe she's not wearing a top, but you don't see her breasts. So you obscure the most interesting part to a man, which is going to be those details, right? Right. Obviously nudity on a book cover, but you're hinting at it. And that's what ends up being titillating towards men. That's why if you see, the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues will always do this. They know exactly what they're doing with this. It's to really pique that interest. Sound Engraver, $2. Thank you. Thank you for the $2. And I appreciate that you like the channel. I really, really do. And I'd like to thank everybody else for dropping by and chatting with us today. It's been a lot of fun. And maybe we'll do it again in the future here. Anything else, John, that you'd like to share before we go?
I just want to thank you for having me on. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. And so it's been a real treat to sit here and flip the tables and pick your brain for once in a while.
All right. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming by. So you can find the links for John's newest book. It's called Neon Harvest. It's a cyberpunk. And to me, I think it's going to have some strong noir elements as well. And I haven't read it yet, though, so I'm going to try to read it here soon. And you could get my newest book, Keys to Prolific Creativity, will be out on March 27th. And please do check out the Silver Empire Book Club. That will be expanding as time goes on, by the way, too. Like, you're not just limited to what Silver Empire has going on now. So this will be another way to enjoy a large variety of books that have been already curated for you. So thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you next time.